the way he taught, in a culture that wouldn't even speak the name of God out loud, he would say, truly, truly, I tell you, come to me if you're weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I will quench your thirst. So he was speaking as God. And I think when we read the New Testament, we don't see that right away, but it's right there.
Folks, welcome back. I'm talking to Carrie Headington, who has degrees from Oxford, Yale, and Harvard, and yet believes in the resurrection of Jesus. I tease people that I like, and I already like you because we have a mutual friend in Jay John, and I love the work you're doing. We're talking about Christmas, and I think, part of the larger narrative of what we're discussing here is it's called the good news, but I think a lot of times believers lose sight of how good it is. Jesus is the answer to everything. When Jesus enters the equation in history or in our lives, he brings truth and life and beauty and goodness. And I think that as things get dark in the world, it's an opportunity for we who are believers to give people hope. And Christmas, of course, it's the ultimate example. It's the ultimate opportunity because people are open more than ever around the year to talking about Jesus. So I'm glad to be talking to you in the Christmas season. You were just making a point, and I want to make sure that you get a chance to finish that.
Well, I think just going back to the historical reality of what we're celebrating at Christmas is that God has come into human flesh. God has come to earth. He has walked among us. He has revealed God to us. So it's time for us to fix our eyes on him. And Jesus is relegated to one of the many paths or one of the many roads, or he's diluted to one of the many gurus. And we need to, as believers, look at what makes Jesus utterly unique and proclaim that into our culture, into our world. And then as we do that, to say, here is what he teaches, and speak that into the dark world where Jesus says, I am the light of the world coming into the darkness.
I guess a lot of times, maybe it's a cliche, but people say that at Christmas time, it's traditionally it's a time a lot of people go through depression. Sometimes, for various reasons, the Christmas season is difficult for people. What do you say to those folks?
Yeah, Jesus is the great healer. Jesus is the great healer. And he said, right at the beginning of this ministry, he said he has come to bind up the brokenhearted. He has come for that reason and that purpose. And as we look at the New Testament, we see God who is reaching out and bringing healing. I think about Legion, who had all of these voices speaking to him and was hurting himself. He was like a modern day cutter. You hear about young people cutting themselves and acting out in depression. And Jesus comes and meets him and puts him in his right mind. And Jesus's first words after the resurrection were, peace be with you. Peace be with you. So he brings his peace. And so what I want to say to people who are struggling is God is real. He is alive. He is good. And he said he has come to comfort his people. And so I encourage people to spend time with Jesus. I think one reason why it's particularly harmful this time of year is we have all these expectations, and people and family let us down. And I want to say, exactly, human beings will always let us down because we are broken, fallen people. But God never will. He says that he loves us with an everlasting love. He says that we are precious and honored in his sight. He says he will never, ever, ever leave us. So in a world that is gripped by loneliness, over 80%, I was just looking, Eric, at the data just in DFW. 38% of people are grieving. Over 50% say they're depressed or anxious. 78% of people purport to being stressed out. Now that's in Dallas, which is like the buckle of the Bible Belt. And the rest of the world, it's even worse. People are groaning. And that is why it is imperative for followers of Jesus to talk about his uniqueness, to talk about his goodness, and to talk about the reality that this pain, this suffering that we are going through, our God does not sit removed from our pain. The story of Christmas is he entered into it and ultimately overcame it. This is the best news in the world.
That's the one thing that I think is compelling to people when we're talking about God generally. People say, "How can a good God allow evil?" Those are all, of course, good questions, and yet Jesus is an example, and that's the meaning of Christmas. God comes into the world and suffers. He suffers with us. He suffers for us. He gives meaning to our suffering. There's nothing like it in the world religions. There is simply nothing like it. The idea of a God who would willingly enter time and space, to leave eternity and enter time and space to suffer and to be a picture of us, of ultimate love. It's absolutely mind-blowing if we can see it afresh. And sometimes it's difficult for us to see it afresh, and we need to make an effort. It's one of the reasons I love C.S. Lewis. He helps us to see these things anew. We'll be right back talking about the meaning of Christmas with Carrie Headington. Folks, I hate to interrupt, but I just don't want you to miss any of the content we're putting out on here. We've just got some amazing stuff. So would you do yourself a favor and hit the subscribe button so we can make sure you don't miss anything? I promise you, great stuff coming up. Hit the subscribe button. Thank you. Part of where I think people get confused is that they have a vague sense of God, and they people will say things, you hear it your whole life, like, don't all religions say the same thing? Absolutely not. And what is it about? Why do I have to believe in Jesus? I believe in God. So talk about something you talk about often, the uniqueness of Jesus, and why the uniqueness of Jesus is not just worth seeing, but vital for us to see.
Absolutely. And people will often say to me, well, prove Jesus was God. And I always say, there are very few things we can actually prove. Most of it is mathematical, but we can know things to be true. And how do we do that? We know things to be true by looking at the evidence. And I always think of 8 things that point to that. And I know we don't have much time, so I just want to encourage people to take a look at it for themselves. The birth narrative Jesus, which we are celebrating in this season, that he was born by the direct action of God in the womb of Mary. There's all sorts of extra historical biblical evidence that corroborates that birth narrative. We even have the cuneiform tablets in England, at a museum in England, that talk about the star over Bethlehem coming.
Now, wait a minute. What museum? Is this the Ashmolean? What museum do they have the cuneiform tablets?
Yes, it's in the Ashmolean.
I guessed it. The Ashmolean Museum. They've got
it.
Lots of great stuff. They've got Guy Fawkes's lantern. But wait a minute. You mean to tell me that they have cuneiform tablets from what period and what?
From right from the 1st century, predicting the star over Bethlehem. So that's why the wise men were looking for this vision in the heavens. So that's phenomenal in and of itself. There's a lot of extra historical biblical writings about the character of Herod. So there's a lot there that I want to commend to people to look at. But it's exciting, and I'm a history major. I love it. The second are his teachings, the way he taught. He in a culture that wouldn't even speak the name of God out loud, he would say, "Truly, truly, I tell you." Come to me if you're weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I will quench your thirst. So he was speaking as God. And I think when we read the New Testament, we don't see that right away, but it's right there. And of course, you know, and you've written about this at length, his teachings are at the heart of the most powerful social reform movements in the world. And so the teaching, so his birth, his teaching, his perfect life, he's the only human being who's lived a perfect life, treating all people with dignity. We see no evidence pointing other than a perfect life in Jesus, a perfect life of love, so powerful that when he was being crucified, he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Powerful. The fourth are, of course, his miracles. My husband and I just got back from Cuba. Miracles are still happening today, and we see the compassion of God. He never turned one person away. I love number 5 would be the fulfillment of prophecy. Scholars say there are over 322 prophecies that are fulfilled in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Now, statisticians have said if Jesus just fulfilled 8 of them, the chances would be 1 in 10 to the 17 zeros, which is like covering the state of Texas with silver dollars 2 feet deep to find one silver dollar. The chances of Jesus fulfilling that, we see things predicted 800 years before fulfilled in the life of Jesus. It's mind-blowing. Number 6, of course, is the death of Jesus, utterly unique. He rose again from the dead. And it was the resurrection that I could not escape from in my own personal conversion. He rose again from the dead. Some of the greatest books ever written on the evidence for the resurrection were people who set out to discount it. Our fellow Yaley Lee Strobel being one of them. And so we have eyewitness accounts. We have the 500. We have the changed lives of the disciples. They all became martyrs. We see the day of worship being changed from Saturday to Sunday. I mean, the evidence goes on and on. There's so much richness there. And of course, the last are his claims. He claimed to be God. He said, I and the Father are one. If you've seen me, you have seen the Father. So as C.S. Lewis said, he was either a liar, a lunatic, or the Lord himself. And last but not least, that we can bank on this Christmas, he's alive. He's alive because 70 to 110,000 people per day purport to following Jesus and making him Lord of their lives. He is alive. He's transformed our lives, and everyone can meet him because he came for the whole world.
That's so beautiful, Carrie. And it is true that every day people are coming to know him, to hear his voice, to experience him. You did. I did. We're pretty educated. We were educated away from this kind of faith, and yet God condescended to reach us, which is amazing.